Hey guys, welcome to Supergrowth podcast, and in this episode we speak to Brendan Hufford, an SEO expert all the way from Chicago, United States. I'm asking him things like, is organic really dead? What is the one thing that people in SEO disagree with him about? A few myths about SEO that keep cropping up, no-click searches, what's the difference between great SEO and poor SEO, role of video and podcast in the SEO world, and what is SEO basically? I'm super excited for this one. So if you're in the SEO game, maybe starting off, maybe you're an expert, or just heard of SEO in general, this one's something that you don't want to miss. Let's take it away.
Dude, so excited.
Perfect. Let's do it. All right. So I'm going to start from a website, man. It just says, I just wish somebody would explain SEO in terms of the rest of us could understand. And that's something that I just saw off a website, and I was like, listen, yeah, that's exactly what I need to know. Please explain to us what this entire SEO thing is, because everybody within SEO seems to know everything. And people outside SEO just like, listen, what are these guys talking about? Okay, before we really dig into the SEO side, let's just get into who you are, man. Can you just like tell us about you?
Yeah, for sure. So I think where people catch me today, right? The SEO director at an agency. I have my own like thriving course and community called SEO for the Rest of Us. I have a newsletter that a lot of people read. There's one going out today with an article that I think will do really, really well and be helpful for a lot of people. I've launched a couple podcasts. I have a YouTube channel that's growing pretty rapidly. They see that and they're like, all right, this all must be part, like this is, they see this, they don't realize this is like my chapter 8, right? They think this is chapter 1 and Brendan's starting and it's whatever. And they don't see that I actually went to college to be a teacher. And because like, why wouldn't you, right? Like I was 18 and they were like, pick a major. And I'm like, I guess teaching, because we'll let 18-year-olds decide what they want to do with their lives. Like, I don't know why we do that, but we do. So I went into teaching and I thought it was going to like, I remember when I had met my wife and I were dating in college, and she actually told me at that point in my life, she's like, I don't understand like why you're not like more ambitious. I'm like, can it be enough? It's such a weird thing to say, like now seeing who I've become. Like I told her, like, isn't it okay to just be a teacher? I just want to be a teacher and like just go to work and have my summers off, and like that's a good life. Like what's wrong with that? And I remember my exact words were chill out. And she loves to remind me that I once told her to chill out, because now she does that all the time. But I got into teaching and I wasn't really sure about it. I tried to like grow my career there. I became an assistant principal. We had just had a baby and my boss quit when I was teaching, and then I took their job. I applied for it and was in that position, and frankly, like was rewarded with Sunday night panic attacks, like a really bad relationship with alcohol. I gained about 30 pounds and was super depressed, and I didn't know what to do. My business at the time that I was running, I had this like niche kind of like online apparel business around Brazilian jiu-jitsu, and it wasn't doing great. Like I wasn't sure how to take it to that next level. I was doing fine. Like it was making a good bit of money, but I didn't know how to escape my day job, right? I had come up in this online marketing world where they're like, buy our course on how to quit your job. And I quit my job. And I was like, I need to quit my job. And then one of my friends was really smart. I've been in the same mastermind group with the same people for like 7 or 8 years, I feel like at this point. And like, one of them was like, why don't you just like take a step back from being a principal and just go to be a teacher again? I said, all right. So I left that and I took a step back, and that gave me enough clarity to be like, all right, I need to sell the business. So I sold my like jiu-jitsu apparel company. I had a review website. I sold that to another person, and I didn't know what to do. And I was just like, well, I guess I'm good at SEO. So helped a couple friends for free that are just like some of my best friends in the world. And we got good results for them. And I was like, all right, this is kind of a thing. I'm going to start my own agency. So I went down that path. And then another really smart friend, this guy named Jason Zook, was like, Brendan, why don't you just work in an agency? And I had genuinely never considered that. I thought you had to like quit your day job and like that was the thing you had to do. And you don't, at least in my case so far. Like I get to do everything I want to do.
Right.
And working at an agency, I work at the SEO director at Click Studios and here in Chicago. And like, I absolutely love it. But I think it's really important to ground that in like, I had my chapter 1 too, just in case people listening are in that same spot.
Right. Yeah. I think it's it's a grounded way of looking at things. In terms of, I think instead of just like diving in, which is what we see all around right now. All these, like you said, the courses and the, just right, jump in and all the hustle side of things, etc. And it's not for everyone. It's not for everyone, and may not be the right time, even if it is for you. It may be that you just need like 6 months, to just like chill out, just figure out, like you said, chill out, right? Just get your head in the right place, and then once you're comfortable, once you're ready, once you've learned the skill, you're on your own timeline. I really like that. It's a different way of looking at it, and I think it's the right way of looking at it, to be very honest. Very nice. Perfect. So we need to know how you got to how you got to all the SEO, the Chicago SEO. I keep on looking at a website and I'm like, every part of a website is just like is optimized, and I'm like, okay, how did that happen? You need to tell us that.
Yeah, I for BrendanHufford.com just sat for a long time because I was so busy building like other websites. Like I was good at SEO, so I ranked really well. The reason I started my own jiu-jitsu apparel company is because I had a local Chicago jiu-jitsu website where I just covered like the local scene, reviewed
Right.
gyms. There was no money being made, and then eventually some guy was like, "Hey, I'll send you a bunch of gear, some shorts for free if you write about them." And I was like, this was before Instagram, before
Right.
influencer marketing was a thing. And I was like, oh, of course. And people started sending me more free stuff. And I stumbled on a website where a guy did camera reviews for a living. And this was in like 2009. I was like, all right, that's a thing.
Right.
So I started the uniform you wear in jiu-jitsu is called a gi. I started gireviews.net and built that up. And I ranked, like, if you Googled any type of like jiu-jitsu gi, any brand name plus the word review, I came up.
Right.
And I started like monetizing that with affiliate links and then people like sponsorships and all this stuff. And I realized that I was putting in like 20 hours of work to make people thousands of dollars. And they sent me a $50 uniform or something. And I was like, all right, that's ridiculous. So I cut out the middleman, created my own brand, and I did all this stuff. And like, that's where I kind of cut my teeth on SEO and what allowed me to sell both of those businesses. The cool thing is that now I get to put all of that work into BrendanHufford.com. BrendanHufford.com it's a personal brand kind of website. I'm putting a lot of content on there around things that are important to me personally. So I'm building out hubs in a very SEO way because I want that organic traffic, but I don't really have a way of like converting it right now. I'm building out a lot of content around podcasting because I love podcasting. I'm building out a lot of content around like taking a break from social media and social media addiction and stuff like that. Things that I think I'm betting I know they're important now. I'm betting on them becoming like one of the, like, not to be dramatic, but like the crisis of our time. Is people becoming like really addicted to this and becoming lonelier than that. Like causation that will increase your rank. There is also zero correlation. Right. So not only does it not cause your rank to go up, it's not even remotely related. There's no reason to do that. All it does is make blog posts really bad because you can tell when people are trying to put that they lead with the keyword. You're like, come on.
Is this a quick reference on how Amazon SEO is right now? is this?
I don't. It might be Amazon too. I'm not as familiar with Amazon, but like the Yoast plugin tells people to do that on WordPress, and like it's just flat wrong. Or they tell you, they give you advice that like they'll say like, we'll automatically put your keyword in your alt text of your images, and I'm like, that's a good way to get sued because it makes the images inaccessible to people with any sort of visual impairment or assistive device. So the plugin thing is a big thing. There's been a lot of debate about it recently. People say things in the SEO industry, not even the SEO industry. I feel like a lot of my like higher level SEO peers are on the same page with me, but a lot of beginners think that plugin is going to do something for them and it doesn't.
Right.
And that's unfortunate. I think the other thing too that my higher level peers disagree with me on is this thing called search intent. I'm staking my whole career on search intent. I think it's the future. Understanding this is what Google is starting to see, or is starting to prove out, in like there's an intent behind the search, and with the people also ask boxes and their own click data and AI and stuff, they're figuring out what people really want when they search something. So if I Google web design, what am I looking for? Do I want to hire somebody? Do I want to learn it? All these different things. And Google's figuring that out better over time. But the problem is the model that we use, that the industry uses for search intent is based on an article that Rand Fishkin wrote in 2007.
Right.
Really mean to tell me that Google hasn't evolved since 2000? Like Google's evolved since yesterday, right?
Yeah.
Like they've updated their algorithm 20 times since yesterday.
Right.
I think that they've updated search intent since 2007, but they say it's like informational, navigational, whatever. But my intent when I'm searching is not to get information. It's a couple layers deeper. The way that I think about it, I don't know if I have the book. Nope, it's not sitting here. There's a book called Breakthrough Advertising by Eugene Schwartz, which is a copywriting book. But he talks about levels of awareness. And I think that's where search intent is. How aware is somebody? Are they Googling their problem? Are they Googling a solution to their problem? Are they Googling a specific solution to their problem, right? Or are they Googling like, I'm ready to buy?
Right.
And those levels of awareness really change search intent from being like, oh, that's navigational intent, but navigating to where? Like, what does that mean? Like all of those kind of things. I think we're still playing at too high a level. And I tell you this because literally I've had my peers write about it and I've said, hey, I think it's actually this. And they're like, well, their response has literally been, well, that's how everybody kind of understands it now. So I don't want to like confuse people.
Got it.
Okay, you're literally perpetuating a lie because you don't want to be the person that says, hey, I think there's a more novel way to think about it. So, but I do think that is absolutely like something that I disagree with a lot of my peers on. It's something I think they just don't, I don't know, it's something I kind of stumbled on because I love copywriting. And I don't think a lot of SEO people view themselves as like, we call them like a full stack marketer or something like that, where I'm like good at a bunch of different things. And I love copywriting. It's like a huge passion of mine. So they kind of blend together.
Right. And, it's something which is interesting where do you think it's an added advantage in knowing copywriting or, having an interest in that subject? Because it directly ties you to more of like a conversion copies, sort of let's say an area of SEO?
Oh my gosh. Of course it does. Like all content should be doing something. And conversion copywriting is literally just the process of, I know, Joel Kletke, like,
right.
I was talking to Joel and he was like, that most of a conversion copywriter's job is not writing. Like most of what we do is just, it's research.
Right.
And then the writing part is this tail end where we make a thing out of it.
Right.
But he was like, we don't even do a ton of writing. And it was just like, that was so interesting to me because I'm like, that's just like writing blog posts, right? That's just like writing articles. That's just like making YouTube videos and podcasts. Like most of the work is the research.
Right.
And the before, the pre-work. And like, I thought that was really interesting. And I also think that like blog posts need to do something. And a lot of people struggle with how do I get these, this blog post has a lot of traffic. How do I get it to convert? Right. I think it's more than just like, well, you put an opt-in here and then you put your lead magnet and all this kind of stuff. Like that's not how you make a blog post convert. What is the story you're telling and how are you using the story and the different things and problem, agitate, solution, and all of these, bringing them to deeper levels of awareness like Eugene Schwartz does. Like, how do we bring them a level deeper? All of that, should the call to action even be a lead magnet or should it be read this next article? That's a lower, like a deeper level of awareness. All of that sort of stuff plays into it. I love how there's an SEO company called Ahrefs, probably does one of the best jobs I've seen of like taking what could be very generic blog content and turning it into a product demo. Like they just so organically weave in their own product into what they teach that you read one post and you're like, I gotta get this. I need this thing. That sort of stuff is, I think, fascinating. And that's where the copywriting comes in.
Perfect. So I think in terms of the conversion, we're on the same page on that. I think it's so important, and I think a lot of content is out there. I call it like lazy effort. It's just that everyone's just like being so lazy about it that they just like the volume is all they're going for. And then they look at the and that's why you see like 6 different pop-ups coming up on a as soon as you
the worst.
Yeah, and it's really big companies as well. It's not just like regular folks or beginners. These are really big agencies who are optimizing those websites, and recommending maybe 7 clicks before you even start reading what the website is, before you really got there. And then you add the GDPR and the cookies and this and that, and now it's just keeps on adding up. Yeah, absolutely. I think the user experience side of the SEO piece is also something that's an interesting sort of angle, which you're sort of, let's say, touching upon the storytelling side of the story. of SEO. Makes sense. So it absolutely ties into copy, and I can see that. Perfect. That was an interesting one. I didn't really think you're going to disagree with a lot of your peers, but that happened. Nice. Okay. Let's see what we get. But yeah. Okay. This is okay. I'm just going to go on the reverse side here. Okay. I'm going to start from the future and then head back. So this one's more of, where do you think SEO is heading, and where do you think SEO is coming from? And normally I would put this at the end, or like somewhere, but I think contextually, people need to be aware of, where like SEO isn't a new thing, right? It's not something which just came about yesterday, and everybody, some people just discover it recently. Some people have discovered it recently, probably because of the overall content is sort of, let's say, out there. People like you are doing 100 days of SEO and this and that, and people who traditionally wouldn't really see that side of things, are seeing the behind the scenes of like something like conversion copy. Like, I didn't know, Joel, I didn't know all of these things, and as you do, as you delve more into the subject, you start to realize that these things exist. And but I want to play the macro first. I think, where's SEO heading, right? And where's it coming from? In whatever order you want to do that. Just like you said, Rand Fishkin, 2000s, and then going into the future. Just paint a picture for us. What's the macro here?
Yeah, I mean, I got into SEO in like 2009, 2010, and it was a spammy game. We were spinning, we were doing the like article spinning software. And this is how like the good guys, like the good people were teaching, like, this is how you have to do it. And you have these like other like Web 2.0 properties, and then those point to the main thing. And then you just spam those with garbage, but then they'll pass, like, they'll filter that out, and you'll get good equity coming through. And then it was like PBNs, like private blog networks, where you had all these little authority sites, but they're actually all your sites, and then you could link to your own stuff with them. And all that stuff, like, let's be honest, all that stuff still works.
Right.
It really does, especially in some industries. And especially in like, because like Google kind of has separate algorithms for different countries and different things. And there's some, like, for whatever reason, like some like Google algorithms are totally different. You can just spam the heck out of them. So I can't say that stuff doesn't work, because it makes me sound super ignorant, and it makes me sound like I'm like virtue signaling that like I do it the best way in this really authentic way. But like, I think that's where we've come from. And unfortunately, like, we're in this weird spot right now where people have figured out how to like reverse engineer what kind of content ranks.
Yeah.
And then you end up with like a first page of results that all looks the same.
Right.
Everybody's like, well, that's what's ranking first. So I'll just write something. They'll try to like use this garbage technique, like the skyscraper technique. But like, they're forgetting that, like, in order to build a skyscraper of note in a city, you can't just make it one floor higher.
Right.
And that's literally what they're doing.
Right.
Like, imagine if you were in a city and it's like, well, this building's like 100 floors. Cool. Ours is 101. Oh, cool. Ours is 104. And like, this just like, that's not how skyscrapers are like 20 floors higher, 30 floors higher. And you have to create this like next level content. Otherwise you end up with like just creating this copycat content. I read 3 articles and I put it in my own words, and here it is. And it's like, there's way better ways to make content. And I think that's where we are now. I think where we're going is that really good stuff is going to rise to the top. I think that searchers are demanding more than ever. I think that in terms of like, so this is something I'm going to be doing soon, an experiment I'm going to run. A study came out by like Jump Shot, and it said like half of all the clicks in Google are no-click searches, meaning like people Google something, they get their result in Google, and then they leave. The problem is that they're not taking into account, these are people Googling the weather.
Right.
And these are people Googling a sports score. They're Googling public, like when was this, battle fought? And like, who is this when was this person born?
Right.
Things like that are kind of commodity information. When you take that out, I'm going to run an experiment, because I want to know, like, how is the click-through rate changing for like really expensive like B2B searches?
Right.
I want to see how much businesses are actually getting hurt by this, and how much of it is people Googling like who won the Bears game last night.
Got it.
Because people are just throwing the statistic everywhere, and people are acting like the sky is falling. And it's like, first of all, this is like the theme of our chat today. Chill. First of all, chill out. Because we're not like, imagine if you were like an organic Facebook marketer.
Right.
Or they took that like to like 0.5%.
Yeah.
Like imagine if 95.5% of searches were no-click searches.
Right.
I think there's a fear that that's where we're heading. The problem is that I don't think Google can control the quality of those searches as much as their algorithm right now it can control search results. When Google starts to own the answers to things,
right.
Like I don't know, if you use like B2B software reviews, like Capterra and G2 and stuff like that. Well, what if that was all just in Google?
Right.
Well, then Google would pretty much have to own that business, because that takes a lot of people to make that run and be authentic and be correct and all of that stuff. And I don't think people trust Google as much as they trust independent companies.
Right.
So I think that Google's pulling more and more stuff into search. Some of it they're doing kind of nefariously, like they'll pull G2's like ratings, and they'll put G2's like proprietary ratings that they've put a lot of time, and then they'll stick those right up like in an advertisement, in a sponsored sponsored thing. And it's like, you can't use our star ratings to like get somebody to click an ad, Google. So some of they got in trouble for like scraping lyrics from people and stuff like that, because lyrics I thought that was a commodity. It's not, because a lot of lyrics are misheard and stuff like that. So Google's done some like stuff like that. I don't super trust them to make the right decisions on all this. I don't think that we're going to a world where like Google's going to control everything. I think as soon as that happens, humans, knowing human nature as well as I do and knowing my own behavior, I would leave Google. I'd start using another search engine. And I hope they do something like that, because it'll make it a lot more democratic.
Right.
But yeah, I think that's kind of where I think things are headed. A lot more around like better quality content, less like copycat content, a lot more focus on search intent, really meeting the people where they're at, reverse engineering what they're trying to get out of their search. And then also just like, I don't think that there's any reason to like panic about like click-through stuff. Like I said, I'm going to study it myself to see if it actually is hurting businesses, but my hypothesis right now, which I'm happy to prove wrong, is that it's really not.
I don't think it's a rule, and this is something that I've learned over some time on the internet, is there is no permanent game. It's an ongoing situation. Google is going to try everything under the sun, with regards to experimentation on this one. If it works, it works. Maybe there are 1,000 things that they'll try, 1,000 calculators they'll put out. Maybe 10 of them really work. If they work, they'll stick with those 10, leave the other ones out. Everybody else can then do whatever they want with the other, let's say 995 or whatever are left. But there's no permanence game here, and this you're seeing with, let's say, with TikTok and with the other platforms, etc. It's such a fast-paced sort of environment that there's no winner take all, when it comes to something like this. And that's also something about SEO that there's no permanent ranking. Right? There's no such thing as, because otherwise there wouldn't really be, it wouldn't be an industry really. You rank once and you're out. And that's something which is always going to be there. There's always going to be space for people to figure out, how do you rank? Considering the ecosystem is the way that it is.
100%. Yeah. I mean, I have a client that I'm working with right now that SEO is usually a long game. It takes a little bit, but they had a great, just huge amount of existing content, and their traffic had just slowly gone down over the last couple of years, and they couldn't understand why. And we just went in, updated all their old content, and we doubled traffic in like 3 weeks.
Right.
Like not like not like from like 1,000 to 2,000, but like from 20,000 to 40,000 a month within a month.
Right.
And the reason was Google was just I think it's a mix between their algorithm, but also like less click-throughs that people can see it's like older. Like if you Google something and you see an article from 2012, probably not going to click it.
Right.
So their stuff was just slowly dropping down the rankings. And as soon as we updated the publish date and we updated the content, it went back to number one. And I'm sure all their like competitors are like, what the heck? Where did this come from? And it's like,
exactly. Yeah.
So I think everybody's different. And if you want to win in SEO, everybody's in a unique situation. Like I can't take a startup website and get you 40,000 in a month. Like that's not going to happen. But everybody's that's what I love about SEO. It's different problems to solve for everybody. It's why I like doing client work, because like I don't want to lose, like I feel like it keeps me super sharp, you know. And you can do this with your own properties if you have like 10 or 15 different websites you're trying to get there, because you're pretty much your own client at that point. But for people that just operate one website and they're SEO experts about how expert they are at their own SEO blog, I don't know about that. I don't know if that you really have that level of expertise if all you're ever looking at is your own SEO blog, you know?
Right. Okay. I think this is like moving into we've I think covered like a lot of our traditional stuff. I'm a little interested in moving into video, you know, and where's that going? Because a lot of people now, that's a lot of content that's not being marked, you know. So like this particular, you know, that's a video that we have right now, the podcast that we have right now. That's a lot of rich content in there. That's a lot of stuff that unless I really convert this into, you know, show notes and like, you know, all of that, nobody's ranking. You know, you can rank the title of the podcast. You may be able to maybe see the popularity of the podcast, but then the content within that, right, is something that's, you know, still to be discovered. You know, still to be sort of seen. So, are we? What do you look at in terms of, let's say, video, and in the role of video, let's say, within the SEO game? Because ultimately, we're looking at intent. We're looking at market research. You know, the consumer at the end of the day is consuming content in different forms, and videos really come up. Where do you see, how do you see that playing out with regards to SEO?
Good question. I mean, video comes up exactly at Google. This is a great example. I know, like my washer broke 6 months ago, and I was Googling like how to fix this like type of washer, and literally a video comes up first. And I put my model number in and everything. And Google was not only like, here's a video of how to fix your washer, you're actually going to only want to watch this like 18-second clip in the middle of this. And it's like, oh my gosh, they not only know that I want to watch a video, they know I want to watch this video, and they know that I want to watch that clip of that video. That is so hyper specific. I think I'm surprised they don't do that with blogs too, where it's like, you not only want to like read this article, you actually only want this one paragraph. So we're just going to send you right there. But if it's all right, I'll just give you my playbook of exactly how I'm doing this with audio and with video.
Go for it.
So with video, I do interviews like this for 100 Days of SEO. I just did one with two of them, actually. One with a guy named Roberto Blake, who's a great YouTuber, and Miles Beckler, who's also a great YouTuber. They're also both podcasters, just media creators. They're both brilliant humans, and I was lucky to chat with them. But the way I structured it was, I know that like show notes don't rank for anything other than people Googling for those show notes. I did a bunch of research on it. I could not find any examples of like, because the problem is in podcasting, people say like, well, you do your show notes for SEO. Stop saying that. That is not how show notes work. They don't help with SEO at all. Other than people, they do a great function for people that want, you know, you get your traffic back to your website. You can maybe get those people to opt in for something, etc. They're really valuable for a podcast, but they're not valuable for SEO. So what I do is I take everything and I turn it. I use my partner Jackie over at like partnered business wise, like over at podreacher.com. Jackie's super helpful. Takes everything, doesn't just do show notes, turns like podcasts and stuff and videos into articles, into actual articles that are built to match the search intent, that are built to rank, etc. And that gives me a skeleton to then go in, flesh it out and stuff like that. So I love working with Podreacher for that. We turn stuff into actual articles. That's like the SEO side of it. The video side of it, I take my videos, and what I'm doing now, instead of putting a 20 or 40 minute video on YouTube, nobody wants that. I've looked at all the data. Nobody wants that. I look at the watch time. Everybody caps out at certain points, etc. It's better to take an article or to take an interview, cut up each set of like questions. Like if we're doing like questions, like if you're Joe Rogan, that's a little bit harder. But if you look, even Joe Rogan has a second channel called JRE Clips. That are explodes. Like it's huge. It's 3 or 4 minutes. Cause like, let's be honest, nobody has time to listen to 3.5 hours, Joe. Jeez, it's the worst. Unless you're listening to like some politician that you want to like hear more about, or your favorite authors on his show, you listen to the whole thing. But those clips do really well. So what I do is I splice everything up. I'm like, all right, we talked about this question. For example, Miles, you know, have you ever heard of like the 10,000 hour rule that like Malcolm Gladwell?
Yeah.
Miles was like, it's not a 10,000 hour rule. He's like, it's actually a 1,000 experiments rule.
Right.
The faster you can do 1,000 iterations. So I'm going to make a video about like why the 10,000 hour rule is wrong. And it's just that clip of him talking for like 2 minutes. I'll put an intro at the beginning and at the end, like an outro at the end, but that's the whole thing. And we're making it for YouTube, for the intent around that, for that audience in that platform.
Right.
So that's kind of like the distribution method. The how does this fit into Google method is, I think like Google obviously pulls in YouTube videos. If you've ever gone on YouTube and typed in a search, go on Google, do that same search and click like the video tab.
Right.
They're different algorithms.
They are, yes.
You'd think that YouTube would just be like, or Google would just be like, hey, what is YouTube? All right, we're going to serve those same ones. They're actually, the YouTube results are way worse.
Right.
Or the Google results are way worse for video than if you just went straight to YouTube and searched it. So it tells me they're still using two separate algorithms, two totally separate teams that are not communicating. Very typical at Google. Right. That's why things like Search Console and Google Analytics don't always work really well together, because it's two totally separate teams.
Yep.
But with them, what's exciting for me is them pulling obviously video in more. For things that video can answer better. Most like business related stuff, obviously blogs and written content are going to answer it better in Google.
Right.
But for things like podcasts, it's really exciting for me, because if you have like a transcript in there, and Google said like we're transcribing episodes too, they're going to start being able to see. The problem is around intent. People are Googling it because they want to learn something and usually get it in written form.
Right.
Maybe not learn, but they want it in written form. That's the result they want mostly. And then with podcasts, the way I think this is going is with like Google Podcasts. They're transcribing all of this now because they want the best podcast search engine.
Right.
So you'll go to google.com/podcasts or something, and you can search every podcast by the words they use, not just like what's in the title. And like Apple Podcasts, have you tried to search anything on there? Horrible.
Yeah.
It's the actual worst. And Google's going to get into that game. That's where I think they're headed.
Right. All right. Yeah, I think that's that. In terms of video, I think it's an interesting space. And you've put it correctly. You sort of, let's say, it's just put out to us. How that entire does it tie into maybe, let's say, pillar content is the way you're approaching this. That you're going to sort of, let's say, the skyscraper content kind of a thing, but within the video game.
Not skyscraper, not like I want to make something that's like 10% better. Like that's what the skyscraper method is. It's like make something that's a little bit better,
right? And
then spam all the people that link to the other one,
right?
Saying link to me instead. Like what a weird value proposition. Like, hello, my car goes, like imagine you rolled up on somebody looking at cars and you're like, hey, you never heard of me and I have this no-name car brand, but our car goes 1 mile an hour faster. You want to buy it?
Yeah.
No. Nobody wants that. So like it's a really bad, like most people that I know in the SEO industry actually do what they call like the shotgun skyscraper method, where they just spam it because it's such a weak value proposition that they're like, I'm just going to reach out to 3,000 people and maybe get 10 links or 20 links.
Right.
Because they know it's such a weak value prop. So I look at like the content cluster model around like, let's have a pillar piece of content in the middle, maybe a 20-minute video about this topic. Yeah. And then around it, I want the more like nuanced searches around it, right? Yeah. Like if I'm going to do one around like content marketing, but then maybe I have like one about like content marketing for real estate agents and how to increase conversions with content marketing and how to get like expert interviews from content, like all of these different like pieces that I'm making this up right now, but all of the pieces, and I treat it the same way of like a pillar in like cluster content would be. Right. And that's what I love about YouTube is it's so democratic. Like if your video's not hitting, people aren't like, it's not going to get promoted. And it's there's no like way to really game it. Yep. You can game it, but you're really just gaming humans and keeping them engaged and stuff. People doing like 1,000 jump cuts and stuff. Yeah. And like, I noticed like, I love vlogs. I love me some Cody Wanner and some Casey Neistat and some Peter McKinnon and Ben Brown and all them. I love them. So I like at the beginning of my videos about SEO want to have like a vloggy kind of intro and stuff. Yeah. What do you take a guess? Does anybody care about my intros when they're looking for SEO stuff?
What I can tell you is that, when I saw your intro, right, it was vloggy, and it really sort of, got that. That was one thing. That was one reason why I was like, listen, I need to get Brendan on here. So like, I seriously, I can get that, because that was a high energy, and I think I mentioned it to you on Twitter as well. Like, it's I in fact got a line from that video, the intro video of your 100 days of SEO, and I put it out to you on Twitter, and that was something where I thought it was high energy, it works, it's natural, it's raw form, it's not scripted beyond the point. You just have a broad idea of what this is, and
Yeah.
people don't really care. But I think what's hidden behind what people talk about, what they care about, and what they actually care about is, I think people do care about authenticity, in the entire conversation. But they don't talk about it. Like, if you go to people and there are, like, let's say, three different people, one of them showing up in that fancy, what do you call it, the fancy video of all of these guys turning up in a really nice car, and all of that. The biological reflex sort of takes you there. The biological reflex is, what, that guy must be important, right? But then once they sit back and look at it, that's where the Peter McKinnons come in. That's where the Caseys of the world come in. Is where, once you consciously make a choice without the biological reflex, you're going to see authenticity. I think that kicks in terms of SEO, that kicks in terms of video content, and it's just true. And yeah, I mean, in terms of like you're saying, I think people do really care about the intro. I think intros are underrated. In fact, there was a friend of mine who I sent my intro to, when it came to this particular, the Supergrowth podcast, and I'm like, what do you think? And he's like, what, you're just, you have a lot of pauses in between, there's some repeat sentence here there, and I'm like, that's how exactly I want it, because if that doesn't really go out, it's not your personality, it's not who you are, and if that's not going to go out, the real people who really are the ones who are going to pay for a service, or the ones who are your real customers, not the 100,000 likes people, the actual five that matter, right? The ones which are really important, they'll come through. They'll really see it. They'll be like, this guy makes sense.
Yeah.
And
you're part of my 35% of people that watch the video, because my like the retention rate, I can tell in the videos where I have like a very vlog, like I come in from out of frame and there's some B-roll and some other stuff, it tanks. Like, it's like within 5 seconds, just pew, straight down to like but those 30%, 30 to 35% of people, it's almost like there's no like drop. Usually you see like more drop off as the video goes on. It's a straight plummet, and then they watch the whole thing because they're in. And it's really, the problem is that I, with my strategy, need to mix it up a little bit. I need to get some banger videos out there that like get to the point real quick and give people what they want, so that the algorithm in YouTube is essentially, you want 75% of people to finish at least 75% of your video, and then stay on the platform. So like, when I only have 30% of people finishing the video, Google's not going to, or YouTube's not going to show that to anybody else other than the people I show it to. So that's a big problem. And like, I need to have other ones that bring people in, like we talked about levels of awareness, bring people into the ecosystem. So then they check out some of my older stuff, and then that stuff builds the relationship, right? Or Google's like, look, like, you've watched 5 of his videos. Not a lot of people stick around for this one, but we still think we want to test it with you because you seem to be into this guy. So that sort of thing. Like, I need to mix up the strategy and create my content for people that I want to get into my ecosystem, but then also the ones that I want to like build deeper relationships with. Because I think you're absolutely right? Like, that 35% of people, that's what Paul Jarvis calls like your rat people. Paul has like pet rats, and he's like, there's rat people, like people who have pet rats. Like, we all are similar kinds of people. That helps you find those people. Those are the people who comment and stick around for sure. It's a good insight.
It's nice that we've just moved into YouTube, and that sort of got me thinking. We started off with you, went into SEO, we moved into YouTube for some random reason, which is all about ranking, yes, algorithm, yes, but which brings me to a very important question, which is about, do you think we're in that moment also where we're in that, let's say, platform overload kind of a situation, or where we sort of, let's say, go and overcomplicate this entire thing of, or have too many platforms to distribute to. So if you're doing a podcast, now you go to anchor.fm and it'll be like, listen, here you go, publish it to 15 other platforms. And do you think that's happening like a lot more because of the, let's say, the attention distribution is moved? So people are, let's say, on TikTok and at the same time are on Facebook, and the same people are on Instagram, and the same people Google something, and the way they decide things, right, is shifting so much. And while the core SEO side of it is on the search engine, but the way people do their research, like you said, is moving and is changing. And like you said, YouTube going into video. But do you think it's becoming overcomplicated though? Like, too many platforms, too many things that people are really talking about, too many things that they're trying to do, whereas they could really focus on maybe, let's say, upping the quality of the content, or really doing the research better, rather than worrying about what platforms and all of these kinds of things. Yeah.
I think a lot of people listen to thought leaders who are not in their space and haven't had their experience. So you listen to somebody like Gary Vee, and you don't realize that he literally has, I think at this point, like most recent numbers I heard, he has 30 people working on his personal brand alone. They don't work for VaynerMedia. They don't do client work. They work for him. And he then says, like, you have to make more content. You have to have more content. First of all, I find that crap exhausting. If I'm on Twitter and you tell me to go over to your Instagram, and then in your Instagram story, you tell me to check out this blog post, and in the blog post, there's a YouTube video. I not only am not going to engage, I also hate you at that point. Because you're literally, you invited me to a party and then told me the party was over here. And then when I got there, it was like this horrible game. And they don't, he's like, look at all my impressions, look at all my views. And I'm like, but there's also people that like don't have that kind. And then he's like, you got to take action. Don't consume all my stuff. And it's like, but all your stuff says to consume more stuff. Like, ew. Anyways, my point is that like people take that as canon and they get overwhelmed. Like, I got to be on Instagram, got to be on TikTok, got to be on whatever. And it's like, no, you don't. Look at people who are winning on one platform. Or do what I do, build a castle, build a moat around it, and then move to a new platform. So like I'm doing that with my blog and with YouTube right now, and I'm going to work on those. And then I'm going to build a moat around them so that those are generating their own traffic organically. And then I'll worry about a podcast. Then I'll worry about Instagram. I don't touch Instagram. I love using it. Stories are super fun because you learn how to like craft a message and use different editing to keep. I love looking at who my retention across, like if I have like a 10 like section Instagram story, I want to see how many people stick around and how good I'm creating open loops and using all my copywriting kind of techniques and stuff. But I always tell people like, what are the channels you can own? And then also like, what are the ones you actually like the work of doing? Too many people are like, well, I love watching videos, or I love listening to podcasts. But do you like editing audio? Do you like editing video? Do you like editing blogs? Like, which one of those do you pretty much because the magic is always in the edit, it's in the thing before it gets published. So don't choose a platform you like consuming, choose the one you like doing the work of, because that's what matters way more. Like, I don't have any interest in editing, going out and taking beautiful photos and editing them and like all that. Like, I don't want to do Instagram. Like, that's not for me.
Got it.
At least right now, don't get me wrong. Like, you might be able to see my camera back there. Like, I love video and I love photography and stuff, but like, that's not the platform I'm going to try to own right now. I don't want to be one of those marketers who's crushing it on Instagram. I want to, as much as possible, I like platforms that are more democratic, like platforms like YouTube and Google and stuff like that. We can talk about the issues within those platforms, but they're still like the more democratic ones. And I prefer those because I like the work of making stuff for them. I think podcasting, a really easy game to get into. Not a big fan of Anchor necessarily because their terms of service are really weird. Some of them say like, we actually own your stuff, and it's like, do you need to? But that said, like, they have a really great platform, and me and a couple friends have used it because I can literally like log in, push a button, it calls you or give you the number to call in,
Right.
and then it records on, like, it's wonderful, the technology behind it. So like the barrier to entry to podcasting is really low. So
Right.
there's a lot of options out there, I guess. But I do think, roundabout way to answering your question, like, we're totally oversaturated with platforms. And the problem is, when you listen to the wrong thought leaders and you don't think for yourself, you end up like not committing wholly to a platform or two.
Right.
And then you end up trying to be like, I'm going to launch a YouTube channel and a podcast and be on TikTok, and I'm going to get my Instagram stories up, and then I'm going to also blog, and then I also want to do that. And then you end up, like, 3 years have gone by and you're like, I don't really have a lot to show for this.
Right. Yeah.
You know, I sold $1,000 in online courses in 3 years. Like, what am I supposed to do?
Yeah.
And it's like, if you just would have gone all in on one and like really learned it and built your castle, built the moat, and then moved on. I think that's definitely the way to think about it, because we're definitely oversaturated, and we will be forever. There'll always be things popping up.
Right. And I think that just brings me to a lot of people who, let's say, are moving into not really approaching organic the way it should, supposed to be, and they're preferring paid. They're preferring to sort of, let's say, move with Google Ads, and we see this with let's say, inbound funnel, which is, let's say, high value content offering, and then of course the scammy ones do it the scammy way, which is, the landing page looks the same, and then they make it look like that, and there's a what do you call it, like a last minute, we have like maybe just 1 day left or 1 hour left or something like that, and then they start pushing out everything everywhere, and sort of the Google ad is chasing you with everything. That's sort of, let's say, a lot of what a lot of businesses sort of, let's say, trying to do is to sort of, let's say, hack their way into, I wouldn't necessarily say search per se, but what they're really doing is they're doing the high value content offering thing, where they sort of, let's say, put out their like an ebook or these kinds of things. And do you think that's also something which is what people sort of, let's say, be careful of? Because people get frustrated with rankings, and what they end up doing is they sort of start moving into Google Ads just for the sake of Google Ads, just so that they rank in the promoted game. And do you think that's also something which you think people are not really spending enough time, they're not respecting the fact that it's actually more of a marathon than a sprint, when it comes to something?
Yeah, for sure. I think the answer is like, yeah, it's do both, obviously. But I think one of the dangers of paid in some ways, SEO has its own dangers, I think. Honestly, like especially in like the B2B world and the tech world and stuff, like SEO takes a long time, and especially if you've raised money, like you don't have a lot of time to prove yourself right.
True.
CMOs only have like a year or two, right? Like they don't have a lot of time to invest in content and SEO and stuff like that. They cast their big vision, and then like that's why we have a lot of CMO turnover.
Right.
Because they're thinking, sometimes they're thinking too long term, sometimes it's too short term, etc. My point is that, like, with moving to paid, is one of the biggest risks I see with moving to acquisition from like only paid platforms, is that there will always be some either incumbent or some new startup, an incumbent with a lot of money, or a new startup with a lot of money to burn.
Right.
And what their goal is literally to burn you out, to make the unit economics so awful that you cannot acquire new customers through paid. And yeah, that company's going to fold in a year, but can you outlast them? Right. Yeah. And that's the game that I see a lot of like people playing, is like, oh, I just got to outlast these people. I think they're going to like close up shop. And like, if you close up shop and then 2 months later, they've been so busy trying to burn you out, they close up shop. Well, neither of you won. Like, there's no point to that. So like, I think a lot of times that's the danger with like only paid.
Right.
Now, it's a whole other discipline, and one that I respect very much, one that I want to learn, especially with an interest in content and an interest in copy. Like paid is a next kind of like step for me to like look into. But I think that, again, like getting rabbit holed into it, you have to test and see what works. And you also have to have a good idea of like what qualifies or maybe quantifies a test. And if you're spending $20 a day on Google AdWords or on Facebook ads, you can't do that for a week and be like, they don't work. Like, like let's get some better data. So I think that's a big part of it. But I do think it's a danger. Again, like the platform hopping, I think the strategy hopping is also a danger. You spin your wheels a lot and waste a lot of time.
Right. And I think that just brings me to brand, and sort of, let's say, impressions that you bring about, not just on let's say search, but also on, let's say, a lot of people trying individual branding, and things that you're doing and things that, let's say, people like me are doing. Is do you think at the end of the day it also comes down to the brand that you sort of, let's say, stick with, the brand consistency, the brand positioning, brand strategy, and not just the SEO tactics around, or just the copy, or those kind of things where it's not just all of that, right? It's also because everyone can do that. I mean, we're living in a world where everyone has access to that. And most of the things are available to most people. Do you think it's also coming down to, if you implement one strategy, I implement another one, and we sort of, let's say, getting the same crowd, we're getting to, let's say, the same similar kinds of positions with regards to results. You think it's also coming down to brand after that when it comes to decision making?
Oh, 100%. So I'm really glad you brought this up. A good example of this is, I'll give you two good examples, especially with like organic search and then one without. So one good example that I was looking at recently is Google has its own like mortgage calculator in the search engine, like in the search results. So people like that used to be big business for a lot of people. They used to get like, there's 3 million people per month Googling mortgage calculator.
Right.
And now a big part of that is a no-click search, because people just do it in Google and they're like, all right, that's how much my mortgage is going to be. Thanks.
Right. Yeah.
And I think that like that's a big deal. Now, 100,000, no, way less than 3 million, but 100,000 people per month Google Zillow mortgage calculator.
Right.
They're not looking for, they're brand loyal to Zillow. 100,000 people per month,
right.
Like over 1 million people a year Google Zillow mortgage calculator. That's where you want to be, because whether Google can do whatever they want in the search results, right? But those people want Zillow. Google could even stick their own mortgage calculator in those search results, and I would wager people would be like, that's not Zillow. Like they'll scroll, right? They'll have that bad user experience. So that's what you want. Like, I think brand means everything. It's something I've come to respect more and more. One of our partners at Click Studios, his name's Derek Nelson. Probably, I honestly, let me just do a quick, like, I'll just fan out a little bit about my boss.
Yeah.
Like, we do these Monday kickstarts, where like pretty much it's like a short TED talk every Monday. Our partners, Derek and ironically the other one's name is Ted, give these like short talks to us, and they have like decks and stuff, and they are the stuff that we do internally. We're begging them to publish this stuff because it is better. Everybody loves Basecamp and their like thought leadership and everything. This stuff blows Basecamp out of the water. Respect to DHH and Jason, like I've been fans of theirs for a long time, but I'm just like, oh my gosh, like this is like some of the best thought leadership I've ever heard. And like one of the things I've learned from Derek, because I tend to like go fast, I'm like I move fast and break things, and like Derek is like, you need to slow down. Like, brand matters, perception matters. You can't publish 30 blog posts in a month and be like, whatever, we'll just update them on the fly if there's something wrong with them. Like, chill. We have to protect our brand.
Right.
And it's like, oh, like that was a very big light bulb moment for me. Because I think that he's one of the smartest, like most like empathetic and I use this word very carefully, like thoughtful people. He's so thoughtful about everything he does. So I think brand really matters. So I guess I'll give you like a third example, because that second one was kind of on accident. This marketer that I love following, his name's Dave Gerhardt. He was the VP of marketing at Drift, a really cool tech company. Dave recently left Drift and was like, today's my last day at Drift, and here's a Patreon.
Right.
I'm starting a new gig in January, but like, here's a Patreon, and it's a private podcast, a private like blog within the Patreon, like all this other stuff. And it was like, I was like, dude, I hope he crushes this, but he's going to prove out a theory right now. He thinks that he's built enough of a brand that he can do this.
Right.
I think he has, because I bought into it.
Right.
And like I pay $30 a month, and like but there's also the other side of like, maybe nobody cares about Dave. Maybe it was just like people loved following the Drift stuff.
Right.
And now that he left Drift, like he's going to find out that nobody cares about him. I'm really glad that that's not true, but like 200 people pay him, anywhere from $10 a month to $1,500 a month. He does a couple like consulting slots in there too, but he has over 200, like I'm looking at it right now, 215 patrons.
Right. Yeah.
And it's like, oh, wow. Like, that's so interesting. Why? Because he built a brand for himself. So there's company brand, but there's also personal brand. And when you have personal brand, you can go wherever you want. And literally, we're paying him for a podcast, something that most people think is insane. Like, podcasts need to be free. Nobody pays for a podcast. I do. I pay. So that sort of stuff I think is really, really interesting. And you're totally right. Like, you can't, brand I think is more important than anything. And I think some people play really, like, maybe they skew too slow because they're like, well, it's my brand and all this stuff. Like, if part of your brand, like, I can tell you without a doubt, part of my brand is like typos and emojis and GIFs and like rants about stuff that I'm just like like, I don't mean to sound like a used car salesman and talk fast. That's just how my brain works and how I talk. But I think that matters, right? I think that's a really good point that you made.
I mean, the idea of the podcast to begin with was to sort of, let's say, not get over technical with things and, sort of bring it back to the basics, is because it touches upon so many different things, and you can't really have SEO without brand, and you can't have, brand without, so many different aspects of, how business works. And the more we get into these silos, we start to, let's say, move into more platforms and, let's say, and the experts have to do it. I mean, because you're executing, like, just Brendan has to do SEO the way SEO is supposed to be done. But then at the end of the day, like you said, the macro conversation is so, and that's why, it's so important, is because that's why you're mentioning your boss here. And that's why, you're mentioning the TED Talk, and, it wouldn't really ever come up, because at the end of the day, that thought leadership aspect is also sort of trickled into SEO.
I mean, who shouts out their boss on a podcast, right? Like, who's like, and I mean that, like, I'm stoked. I'm in a very blessed position to be able to like love where I work and love my boss. But yeah, like, all of that stuff matters because I think when we're talking about all these different platforms and ecosystems, like, me mentioning him here, like, gets picked up somewhere else. And then that, like, I'm going to link to you, like, like when you have a relationship, I think that's really what we're talking about here is relationships. When you have relationships with somebody, you're going to like share their stuff in your Instagram story. You're going to link to them. You're going to have them on your podcast. You're going to like do stuff with, like, all of that stuff matters. And a lot of that is like really just building into other people and things like that. So I think that's like relationships is really, I think, like the name of the game. And when you're playing too fast and you only care about like, give me a link or like, give me a shout out, like when that's your first ask, it's transactional. Like there's no long-term relationship there.
So what Brendan is saying is SEO is love. Is what he's saying.
I have an article coming out here in a couple of weeks where I took like some of the top online marketing blogs and I looked at who did they link to the most from their blog. And spoiler alert, it's their friends. I don't know if any of them do it intentionally, but I can tell you without a doubt, people link to the people that they have, like Pat Flynn, Smart Passive Income. His most linked to stuff is like Amy Porterfield and Derek Halpern and like all of these other people that are like, oh, all right, cool. That like what's his name? Dang it. There's a couple other people. But like, I think that like, if you look at it, they're people that are in his mastermind, people that he's like friends with, like things like that. Like the most linked to site from smartpassiveincome.com is to Chris Ducker's blog. And I don't think it's a surprise that Chris Ducker is his best friend. Right. Yeah. Like, it's just, when I'm choosing things to link to, I'm going to link to the resources that are top of mind. And those are the ones that are my friends. So that's how I think about it.
Perfect. And then I don't know, man. It's moved into such an area. It's moved into a fuzzy area of this entire thing. I don't want to like come back to any questions which are let's say not as let's say fuzzy. But I think I don't know if you have to define like what great SEO and what poor SEO is. We've sort of touched upon it, I think, throughout the entire thing. But I think if you can sum it up in that way, which is if what is great SEO and what is poor SEO?
So I think that SEO is not a thing you can like fall into anymore. You can't just like stumble into rankings like you used to be able to. Like you just publish, and it's like, whoo, Google picked up a couple blogs and here we go, right? That doesn't, I think that's for anything that like can make you money or build a brand or like anything that's worth ranking for, that can't happen. Like that won't happen anymore. Right. So you have to be really intentional. So I think great SEO is a couple things. It's putting out stuff that and obviously there's layers of like imposter syndrome in here too, and I'm acknowledging those, but like putting out things you're proud of and proud to share with other people, like not having a bunch of content that you're like, oh, this is pretty cheap and I'm just trying to get rankings or whatever. I think like brand is a big part of SEO. When people arrive on your website, they need to know who you are and what you're about right away. They need to know like something about you and be made to care about something related to what they care about, right? Weaving your story in there or weaving in things about like, it should be about the user and about what they want. But if they leave and like anybody could have written that article or like anybody could have created that content, then they're going to be like, there's nothing that I know about this person that would make me want to come back for more or subscribe or take action. I also think that great SEO is playing the long game. It's creating content that's evergreen and creating content that you can update over time. And another part of SEO that not a lot of people talk about is just creating articles that will like get links naturally, right? That are just interesting and funny. I have an article on my website. I was inspired. One of my buddies isn't really into cryptocurrency. And there's this website that just has like, they call it like crypto obituaries. And he links every time somebody says cryptocurrency is dead in a blog post, he links to it. And it's just this running tally. And it's so funny because he's like making the point, like, this is clearly not dead. You guys have been saying like 20 times a month, this is dead for like years.
Right.
So I made one about SEO obituaries and like, and like all these things, like just like silly stuff like that. But it's playing the long game of search and it's playing the long game of Google. That's like, look, like people said search engines were dead in 1997, right?
Yeah.
And in 2005, like, SEO has died 22 times at this point. It's not dead. It's not going anywhere. As long as people are searching for things on the internet, SEO will be a thing. And SEO is not just Google, it's Amazon and YouTube and podcasts and all these things we've been talking about. And like, I think great SEO is just really figuring out like what people want when they're searching for stuff, and then figuring out like, where's the overlap? Like, here's the things I want to talk about. Here's what people are looking for, and like, what's the overlap? And I think that is like super simplistic, and we can get more tactical if you want, but like, that's kind of how I think about it.
Right. And I think, which also sort of brings me to, something a little more less tactical, but more, let's say, tools oriented. How do you think like technology, especially, let's say, marketing technology, or, generally the kinds of tools that are available online, how's that sort of, let's say, impacted how people approach things like SEO, market research, researching what the consumer wants? You think it's over data driven, or you think it's adequate and it's really moved into a good space where you really know what's happening?
I think that if you know how to use this stuff, you'll find great things. Right. I think if you know how to research humans, this is where a lot of like the copywriting research comes in that SEO people skip. SEO people, and I'm not trying to villainize anybody, but I think that's where you get into that copycat content. I'm going to look at the top 3 ranking articles. I'm going to look at what they're talking about and how they're talking about it. I'm going to read them. I'm going to put it in my own words. I'm going to make sure I'm going to go into Ahrefs and look at all that different stuff. I'm going to look at competitor articles. What are the keywords they're ranking for? What do I want to rank for? I'm going to put it into ClearScope, which is a tool that I actually use myself. But they're going to do it in like a lazy way of like, I'm just going to create it so it checks all the boxes and makes everything green and has all the right like entities and topics and things like that. Stuff my keywords in there so that ClearScope says it's good. ClearScope is a check to like a tool to check and make sure you're talking about the right entities that Google wants that Google's currently ranking. Right. The problem is you can make your ClearScope thing, it could be unintelligible, and ClearScope would say, this is fine, because it's just checking entities. It's not an actual human, right? Right. Yeah. So the problem is people skip human steps. They don't look at Quora when they're researching an article. They don't look at like They don't check. I love looking at Amazon 3-star reviews on a topic.
Right.
That stuff, like there's gold in there. Because usually when somebody leaves a 3-star review, they have really strong feelings about it, but they're also really strong in like this. I have hope that this was better.
Right.
Right. A 1 or 2-star review is like, this sucks, I hate it. Bye. 5 stars, like, this is the best thing ever. It's the new, like, whatever, you know, the new, like, I don't know, like
the hype,
greatest book of all time, whatever. My point is like a 3-star review is like, yeah, I loved it. It was great. But like, here's something that really turned me off. And it's like, when you read the 3-star reviews of like the top books and whatever you're trying to write about, all of a sudden it's like, oh, like that's something I should include, or like, oh, that's something I shouldn't do. But you're really researching humans. And I think a lot of that gets left out of SEO. And that's where, if you've ever read an article where you're like, get out of my head, like you are reading my mind, that's the kind of research that they've done.
And I think, you know, in the middle of what you're just basically pointing to is very straightforward, you know, that as much as technology is going to come in, you know, things like a Reddit forum, you know, things that people are really talking about, you know, in the corners of the internet, or, you know, when they're chit-chatting with their friends, you know, on WhatsApp or some other messaging app, you know, that's the kind of stuff that's really where, you know, intent is, that's really where the behavior is. So yeah, I mean, you know, if you can use the tools, if you can use the data that's already there, and, you know, sort of, I think at the end they have the common sense to really see, you know, that what I'm reading right now doesn't make any sense. You know, and I keep on getting, you know, whenever I get the first draft of any copy, or whenever I get, the first thing I look at is, does it even make sense? Because it may check all your applications. You know, it starts from, you know, in this part of the world, a lot of people use Grammarly, because that's not something which is, let's say, you know, a first language thing. So a lot of people, let's say, generally use Grammarly, then they use, let's say, other parts of, you know, other software, like you're saying, like the ClearScope bit, which is, you know, just going through everything. But then at the end of the day, what's really coming to is dropping into those conversations, or, you know, across the internet. Yeah, absolutely makes sense. Perfect.
For sure. And if you like, if people are using Grammarly, also check out, there's another one called Pro Writing Aid.
Right. Okay.
Pro Writing Aid is super popular amongst a bunch of like writers that I know. That might be also helpful too.
Makes sense. In terms of the tools, any shout out that, you know, you feel, any shout out to any tools that you've used over the years, which are, let's say, SEO, Brendan Hufford approved SEO tools?
You know, I'll just, the ones that I use like day to day are, I use ClearScope. Bernard at ClearScope is fantastic. Initially, I wrote the tool off as like, this is bad. And then like we started using it more and more, and I'm like, you can definitely use this for good.
Right.
And then also I use Ahrefs. And then I also use, we use for a lot of our outreach, we use Pitchbox. Some people use Pitchbox to just spam like crazy. What's cool is that Pitchbox is not into that at all. You'll get in trouble with them. We use it to track data. When you're sending out as much outreach emails and building, like the way we do a lot of outreach is with a very like Dream 100 approach of like, I don't know if you're familiar with like Chet Holmes and Ultimate Sales Machine, but like just instead of reaching out to 1 million people, just reach out to the 100 most important ones.
Right.
So, but we use it for just data, for tracking. Like, it's also, they have a really great like jobs to be done approach in there that helps people send a lot of like meaningful outreach without losing their minds, without feeling like I'm slowly, my soul is dying because I send a lot of emails every day and I'm always in my inbox. The team, like we have 2 people that do outreach full time at Click, and like it's really important to me that like they don't feel like their job is soul crushing. So like having the data on that is like really helpful. And then we can also share that with clients. So we love Pitchbox. For that, I met the team. And then when I was in Philadelphia at Traffic Think Tank, if you're doing SEO at a high level, if your job is in any way dependent on SEO, right, you should definitely join. And I say this as somebody with a paid community myself. Like I'm also paying to be in Traffic Think Tank. That's really, really important to me. So I love being in Traffic Think Tank. If you want to read some good Joel Kletke copywriting, you can go to trafficthinktank.com. He did all the copy there. It's really good.
Right.
And then also, yeah, I mean, those are like the things that I use that help me do, you know, Traffic Think Tank isn't really a tool, but it is something that like is a sanity check on my job every single day. It is health and like mental health insurance for the work that I do.
Right.
So yeah, I think that's really what I use. I don't make it too complicated. I use Screaming Frog and a couple other things, but nothing like super complicated. People like that. I've got that question, like, what's your, not that this is what you're asking me, but like, what's your tech stack? And I'm like, you're making this too hard. Like, this is not, when you're using 13 tools,
Right.
I just don't think it has to be that complicated. Some people prefer like Sitebulb
Hmm.
or Deep Crawl, or they have preferences in tools. Both I've never used either of those, but heard they're both great from smart people that I like and trust.
Right.
But yeah, I don't know. It's not that complicated for me.
So I think you've answered the tech stack question perfectly. The immediate next question is, we've sort of moved into the fuzzy area of this entire conversation. So what's your people stack? So you mentioned Joel Kletke. You mentioned a few other people, your boss for sure. What's your people stack? Who are you really, sort of, let's say, learning from?
Yeah.
When it comes to on an ongoing level, maybe Twitter, maybe something else. What's your people stack?
Oh man, how much time do we have? Right?
How much are you want?
I really pay attention to only a few select people,
Right.
and people that I trust. And when they tell me to check something out that is maybe not something I would ordinarily look at, or a resource I would be like, that's garbage, I'm not going to look at it, I still trust them and I look at it. So I mean, obviously I have like people I follow on YouTube because I really like that. And I feel like they make me, their video, like people like Matt Diavella, not like really helpful for like personal development, my mental health, things like that. Sherry Walling, from Zen Founder, like really good. Like I've been through a lot of like mental health stuff. This is a thing that happens. If you've never experienced this, you will at some point. You'll get everything you wanted in life, things you built up in your head to be like, oh my God, when I get this, I'll finally be happy. Sorry, I don't want to spoil it for you. You won't be happy. That thing will not make you happy. But when you get there, you'll be like, oh my God, what am I working for? And you might, like, I had a freak out about a year ago and like really struggled with my mental health. So Sherry Walling's like content with Zen Founder was really valuable there. I mean, I've mentioned, here's the thing, like I'm really selective on my input. Like I will unfollow you on Twitter in a second if I think that you're not like providing value for me, or you're retweeting a bunch of just crap that like makes me feel bad and stuff. So I only follow like around anywhere from like 100, like less than 200 people at all time on Twitter. I don't know how people follow more people than that. But like, yeah, like people like Sean McCabe at Sean West is really influential for me. Obviously the three people at Traffic Think Tank, Matt Barbie, Ian Howells, and Nick Eubanks are people that I really follow. I love Jimmy Daly and Ryan Law over at Animals with a Z. Really good thought leaders in terms of like content and stuff like that. If you want to learn how to do Instagram, if you're like, Brendan, this is cool. I'm like, I listen to all the SEO stuff, but for some reason I'm still into Instagram. Look at what like Ryan Fisher is doing on Instagram. He's a CrossFit guy, and like a fitness guy, but he's with a very low follower count, has built a humongous business. So he's really interesting. For YouTube, I follow Cade, K-A-D-E, Cade Dworkin, and Tom Martin are both great. I mentioned Dave Gerhardt earlier. I don't know. I have a lot, like, I love, like I mentioned, Miles Beckler. Like really anybody I've had on 100 Days of SEO has been somebody I've like cajoled into joining me. Because like I just love them and think the world of them. But like I follow a guy named Jay Akunzo who is like really big on like business podcasting. And then there's like a lot of people in the online marketing space. Like I've worked with Pat Flynn for a long time. Love Pat Flynn. I love like Jason Zook and Caroline Zook. They have a thing called Wandering Aimfully. Like I could go on for days and days with this. Like I'm very selective, and all of these people are genuinely like Paul Jarvis and Kaylee Moore over at Creative Class. Like if you're a freelancer, they should check that out. Like I love, so like there's so many people that invested in me. I feel like early as I was investing in myself, buying courses and being in communities, that like, you know, even Ken Wallace, I would say is like one of my like closest friends. He has a thing called Mastermind Jam that helps you like just have like amazing mastermind groups that don't fizzle out over time, which a lot of them do. Sean Blanda he worked with Ramit Sethi for a long time, was at InVision. Now he's at a new startup called Crossbeam. Like I consider Sean to be like a mentor. So I don't know. My people stack is it might sound like a lot of people, but
Right.
if somebody took a step back and they're like, oh my God, I consume content from 500 people.
Right.
Like my world is very small,
Right.
and I'm very careful about who I let in and who I get influenced by. And this is, again, like after years of refinement and realizing that input equals output. And if I garbage in, garbage out, I have to like really like curate that stuff. And a lot of the people, I'm going to be honest with you, the best people that you're going to find that are going to have the most influence on you are people that like they're not like personal brand people.
Right.
You know, like there's a guy named Dave Ojeda, who's here in Chicago, who has been in the SEO game like since I was in like high school.
Right.
And he's forgotten more than I know. And he's also like into real estate and into investing and into like all of this like finance stuff. And I'm just like, he is like my Obi-Wan Kenobi. Like I somehow have a relationship with him that I've convinced him to let me ask him questions and get coffee with him once a month.
Yeah.
And it's just like, I don't know why he keeps talking to me, because he is just filled with so much knowledge.
Right.
But like, he's not building a big personal brand. So like not a lot of people would know that so I think like just online is great, but also like look in your local community. If you're doing SEO, or if you're doing, building a brand, or you're building, you have an agency or whatever, find people locally that you can learn. Find somebody who's been in business for 25 years. They know some stuff. They know some things you can learn from. So I think that's been like a huge like learning, we call it a hack, but like that's been a huge like thing for me, is just figuring out like I can learn from a lot more people than just the people that have big brands that you'll email and they'll never reply. You know, don't just consume their content, like actually like build relationships.
So I think I was going to initially be like, listen, I'm going to take the names of all these people that he's going to talk about. Maybe they're going to be like 2-3 people, and like tag them on Twitter.
No, like, man. It's impossible. Like you're gonna have Glenn Alsop and Ross Simmons and John Cooper and all these other people. Like there's too many. There's just too many.
I mean, I haven't even touched on like so many other areas. This is like things that are coming up in just the top of your head. There's so many other people that So I keep on seeing these people on Twitter. As part of this entire community of people. But there's so many other people who just aren't there, and they're really, like you said, the relationship building piece is, right there. But listen, kudos to you. You're really very few people that I can say who can like say so many names and give me a background of all these people, and genuinely do it. So I think this is the real SEO. I think this is where we are. Things that really Google can't really index. These kinds of things. So. And I'm sure there's some SEO guys out there who'll be like, no, Harlaksh, you know what? Some people like Google can index that as well. But I'm just saying, it's just one of those things where it's just genuinely coming from someone who's learned and who's sort of, let's say, been part of all of this and doesn't want to sort of, make it sound very, sort of hype people up or whatever that is, or hype the industry up or those kind of things. And you're giving it like it is when it comes to these kind of things. So it's really, really cool. That's nice. That's pretty much it, really, man. I think
great.
It's been good amount of stuff. We've sort of gone through all the areas that that I could have sort of, let's say, I could think of. All the stuff that I saw on your website, all the SEO stuff, all the SEO stuff that is sort of, let's say, was on the top of my head as well. Anything you like to add? Anything that any area that you think we've sort of, let's say, you want to get into, something that you wanted to, but we didn't really bring up.
Yeah. No, I mean, we covered like a lot of the things that I think are super important right now, the things that people are missing, the things that people are doing wrong. And then I think we've also highlighted, I've given probably like 20 plus examples here of things that people are doing really, really right and doing well. So I think like you kind of have a good blueprint. And I think like when it comes back to the North Star is like of what we've talked about today is this takes time. Like this is a long game. Like playing a long game matters. When you get to the point where like you are not financially secure, but like when you're at a point where you feel like you've done a good job, like building something, consider thinking like longer term. Right. And I think the way like from the beginning, the thing you can do from the start, even when this is why I love SEO, is I can get plugged into anybody's business. The way that I established a lot of early relationships was just by saying, hey, can I just audit your site? Like, I'll do it for free. I just want to like hopefully help you. I believe in your message. I want to help you. And then those people 5-10 years later are now promoting me to their community. They're my like JV partners and affiliates and or whatever. They're my guests on my podcast. They're my friends, right? They're people that if I text them because I have their number when I'm in town, they will drop everything and get coffee with me or have dinner or invite me to their house. So, I met their kids. Like those things matter way more. And I think those things, whether it's the SEO game or the brand game or whatever, it's all the same. Like those relationships, instead of trying to get links or trying to get shares, like just try to get friends.
Right.
I think that pays off infinitely more in the long term.
Perfect. So I think I've made a friend here, Brendan.
For sure, man.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks for bearing with all the technical hiccups and this and that. And
all good.
I've got something for you that Google probably can't index. So I've got this. I don't know if it's coming.
Yeah.
It's coming.
You're welcome, man.
Perfect.
Thanks for having me on.
Love speaking to you, Brendan. Take care. Cheers.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye bye.